This all started back in March when my husband, Peter, 39M, started acting weird about our finances. We've been married for 7 years, and we always had a system where we both contributed to our joint account for bills and savings, while keeping personal accounts for our own spending. I first noticed something was off when I went to transfer money for our annual vacation fund, and saw the balance was way lower than it should have been, like $12K lower. When I asked Peter about it, he got really defensive and said he'd been sending money to his mom because she needed some medical treatments that weren't covered by insurance. His mom, Janice, 68F, lives about 3 hours away, and while we're not super close, we've always gotten along fine. She's had some health issues over the years, so his explanation made sense. I asked if we should go visit her, and he immediately shut that down, saying she was embarrassed about her condition and didn't want visitors. Over the next few months, more money kept disappearing. Every time I brought it up, Peter would get upset and talk about how his mom's treatment wasn't working and they needed to try something else. He'd say things like, "Do you want my mother to die?" whenever I questioned the amounts. I felt like a complete jerk for even asking, so I backed off. By August, I noticed another $30K had been transferred out of our account. This was money we'd been saving for a down payment on a new house. I was starting to get really concerned, so I sat Peter down and asked for details about his mom's condition. He got super vague, talking about specialized treatments and alternative therapies, but wouldn't give me any specifics. That night while Peter was sleeping, I checked our joint account transaction history. The transfers were all going to an account I didn't recognize, not to Janice. When I asked him about this the next morning, he claimed he was sending money to his brother Tobias, who was handling all the medical stuff since he lived closer to their mom. This explanation didn't sit right with me. For one thing, Tobias and Janice have never been close. For another, Peter and Tobias barely speak. They had a falling out years ago over some family business. The whole thing started to smell fishy. I decided to do some digging. I went through Peter's desk while he was at work and found statements from a credit card I didn't know existed. He'd maxed it out. Another 18Ks in debt that I knew nothing about. Most of the charges were for restaurants, hotels, and expensive gifts from places like Tiffany's. Unless his mom was staying at the Four Seasons and eating at Michelin-starred restaurants while dying, something wasn't adding up. In October, when Peter left his phone unlocked on the counter while he showered, I never snoop, but at this point, nearly 60K of our savings was gone, and I needed answers. I opened his messages and saw a conversation with someone saved as KP Work Project. "Peter, transferred another 5K today. Will be in your account by tomorrow. KP Work Project? OMG, thank you, baby. Can't wait to see you Friday. I've got something special planned. Peter, can't wait. The stupid pig believes everything. Just cry about mom and she hands over money. KP Work Project. You're so smart, baby. It's why I love you. Your wife is such a doormat, LOL." There were photos too. KP Work Project was definitely not his mother. Unless his mother was a 22-year-old blonde named Kayla who liked sending lingerie pics. I scrolled through months of messages. They'd been seeing each other for almost a year. I found exchanges where they joked about me, planned vacations using our money, and even discussed how they'd be together once they'd drained enough from our accounts. There were messages about a condo they were looking at together. Our house money was going to fund their love nest. I wanted to confront him immediately, but I knew I needed to be smart about this. If I just accused him, he'd deny everything and possibly hide more money before I could stop him. So I decided on a different approach. I called his mother. We hadn't spoken in months, but she seemed happy to hear from me. I casually asked how she was feeling, and she said she was doing great, just back from a cruise with her friends. When I mentioned medical treatments, she had no idea what I was talking about. She hadn't been sick at all. That's when I came up with my plan. I told Janice I wanted to surprise Peter for our anniversary, a small lie, and asked if she'd come stay with us for the weekend. She agreed immediately, saying she'd love to see us. For the next week, I acted completely normal around Peter. He made 2 more transfers to his mom during that time, totaling another 3Ks. Each time, he'd tell me some sad story about how the treatments weren't working and they needed to try something more aggressive. I just nodded and said we'd do whatever it took to help Janice get better. Last Friday, I took the day off work but pretended to go in as usual. Instead, I picked up Janice from the train station and brought her home. Peter wasn't expecting either of us until evening. We sat in the kitchen and I finally told her everything. The missing money, the girlfriend, the lies about her health. She was livid. I've never seen a 68-year-old woman so ready to throw hands. We decided to wait and confront him together when he got home. Around 4 p.m., I heard his car in the driveway. He came in calling my name, clearly surprised I was home early. Then he walked into the kitchen and saw his mother sitting there, healthy as ever, with a stack of bank statements in front of her. I've never seen someone go so pale so fast. He literally grabbed the wall to steady himself. Before he could speak, I very sweetly asked him how his mom's treatments were going and whether the last 3K transfer had been enough to cover them. Janice stood up and asked what medical treatments he was talking about because she hadn't been to a doctor in months except for her regular checkup, which had gone perfectly. The look on his face was almost worth the 60K he'd stolen. Janice grabbed the statements and started going through them item by item. Four Seasons Hotel? Tiffany's? Who were these for, Peter? It certainly wasn't for your dying mother. Peter finally broke. He admitted everything. The girlfriend, the money, all of it. He tried to claim it was just a mistake. that he'd gotten caught up with Kayla, but he really loved me. Janice wasn't having it. She told him he was no son of hers, that his father would be ashamed, and that she was removing him from her will effective immediately. I calmly told Peter he needed to leave. He begged and pleaded, but I'd already packed a bag for him and called his brother Tobias, who confirmed Peter had not been sending him money for their mother. Turns out Tobias hadn't even spoken to Peter in over a year. Peter left that night. I changed the locks the next morning and transferred what little money remained in our joint account to my personal account. I also froze our credit cards and contacted a divorce attorney. That was 3 days ago. Since then, Peter has sent me texts from his brother's couch where he's apparently staying. They range from apologetic to angry to desperate. He claims Kayla dumped him as soon as she realized the money train had stopped. I haven't responded to any of them yet. My attorney advised me to document everything, but not engage. I've been staying with my sister Luna while I figure out next steps. I keep thinking about all those months I believed him, how I felt guilty for questioning him about the money, how I thought I was helping save his mother's life, all while he and his girlfriend laughed at what a gullible idiot I was. I still don't know what to do about the money. The lawyer says we might be able to recover some of it, but it'll be a long process. I'm meeting with Janice again tomorrow. She wants to help me nail Peter to the wall in the divorce. Here's where I need advice. Peter's family, except for Janice, is blowing up my phone saying I should talk to him, that he deserves a chance to explain. Should I even bother hearing him out? Is there any explanation that could possibly make this better? And how do I move forward knowing that the person I trusted most in the world thought of me as a stupid pig who he could manipulate so easily? Update. Thank you all for the overwhelming support. A lot of you asked what Janice said when she found out Peter had been using her illness as cover for his affair. Let me just say that the words that came out of that woman's mouth would make a sailor blush. I've never seen someone so furious. She's been calling me daily and has promised to testify in the divorce proceedings if needed. She actually apologized to me, saying she felt responsible for raising such a terrible son. I've been collecting evidence for my lawyer, and things are about to get very interesting. We'll update again soon. First update. A lot has happened since I confronted Peter with his very much alive mother. For those asking for an update on Janice, that woman is a force. The day after the confrontation, we met for lunch as planned. She brought a folder containing every birthday card, Christmas gift, and family photo of Peter she could find. She went through each one telling me stories about his childhood, then ceremoniously ripped them all in half. She said no son of hers would treat anyone this way, especially not his wife. Janice insisted on calling Peter's dad Ralph. They've been divorced for years but remain friendly. She put him on speakerphone right there in the restaurant and told him everything. Ralph was completely shocked. Unlike the rest of Peter's family, he didn't defend his son at all. Instead, he asked for my lawyer's information so he could provide any documentation needed for the divorce. That's when Janice dropped another bombshell. Apparently, Peter had asked his dad for money a few months ago, also claiming it was for Janice's medical bills. Ralph had sent him $15K that I knew nothing about. So that's another $15K on top of our $60K. The total keeps growing. While we were still at lunch, Peter called Janice repeatedly. She finally answered on speakerphone, and he immediately launched into this rehearsed-sounding apology about how he'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to make things right. Janice cut him off mid-sentence and told him she'd already changed her will, removing him entirely. Then she said something I'll never forget. I may not be sick now, but knowing what you've done has made me sick to my stomach. Don't contact me again until you've returned every penny to your wife. After lunch, I went back to Luna's place to find Peter sitting in the driveway. Somehow he'd figured out I was staying there. He tried to block my path, begging for 5 minutes to explain. I refused to engage and called Luna from the car. She came out and told him she'd call the police if he didn't leave immediately. He eventually left, but not before shouting that I was overreacting and destroying our marriage over one mistake. One mistake. Stealing $60K and carrying on a year-long affair is apparently just one mistake in Peter's book. The next day, I met with my divorce attorney Lisa, who advised me to file for an emergency financial restraining order to prevent Peter from hiding or transferring more assets. When we looked deeper into our finances, we found even more disturbing transactions. Peter had been systematically draining our accounts for longer than I realized. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as he got bolder. Lisa estimated the total closer to $85K when we factored in the credit card debt and other hidden transactions. Lisa also advised me to check my credit report. Good thing I did. Peter had opened 2 additional credit cards in my name that I knew nothing about. They were maxed out with charges to hotels, restaurants, and various online retailers. Lisa immediately helped me report the fraud and put a freeze on my credit. 3 days after our confrontation, I finally worked up the courage to go back to our house. Luna came with me for support. We found the place in complete disarray. Peter had clearly returned and ransacked it looking for who knows what. My jewelry box was empty. The deed to the house, which we keep in our home safe, was gone, along with several other important documents. Even my passport was missing. I called the police to report the break-in and theft. When they arrived, one of the officers mentioned they'd had a similar call from our address a few days earlier. Turns out, Peter had called them claiming I'd illegally locked him out of his house and taken his belonging. The officer explained they'd told him it was a civil matter since we were married, and they couldn't force entry on his behalf. I filed another police report for the stolen items and provided the officer with copies of my marriage certificate and the deed. Thankfully, I had digital copies stored online. I also showed them the emergency financial order my lawyer had filed. They took the information, but warned me that recovering the items might be difficult without proof that Peter specifically took them. While we were cleaning up the mess, Peter's sister Rosalind showed up unannounced. She started lecturing me about how marriage is for better or worse, and how I needed to forgive Peter because family comes first. I reminded her that Peter apparently didn't think family came first when he was stealing from me and mocking me to his girlfriend. I also mentioned that he'd used his mother's fake illness to steal from his father too. That shut her up pretty quickly. She left after saying she was just trying to help, but not before warning me that Peter was in a bad place and I should be careful about pushing him too far. That night, Kayla herself reached out to me through Instagram. She sent a message saying she never meant to hurt anyone, and that Peter had told her we were separated and in the process of divorcing. She claimed she only found out we were still together a month ago, but by then she was already in love with him. She attached screenshots of their conversations where Peter told her our marriage was over in all but paperwork, and that he was only staying with me to figure out the finances before leaving. The screenshots also revealed something that made me furious all over again. Peter had taken Kayla to our vacation home in the mountains, a cabin that's been in my family for generations. There were photos of them together there in my family's cabin, drinking my grandparents' vintage wine collection. In one particularly infuriating message, Peter told Kayla they should upgrade the place once it was officially theirs after our divorce. I didn't respond to Kayla directly. Instead, I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who said the evidence was helpful but advised against further contact with her. Lisa explained that Kayla might be reaching out now to protect herself, fearing I might sue her for alienation of affection. Apparently that's still a thing in our state. The next morning, I drove to the cabin with Luna to check on it. The place was a mess. Empty wine bottles everywhere, dirty sheets, food left out to rot. They'd clearly been using it as their love nest for months. I found women's clothing in the dresser that wasn't mine, along with a notebook containing what looked like plans for renovating my family cabin. There were estimates from contractors, material samples, and a timeline that showed they were planning to start work next month. I spent the entire day cleaning and securing the cabin. I changed the locks, installed a simple security camera system Luna helped me pick up on the way, and made an inventory of everything that was missing or damaged. My grandfather's fishing gear was gone, along with some jewelry my grandmother had kept there. The total value was probably around $5,000, but the sentimental value was priceless. While we were there, Peter called Luna's phone. He's now blocked on mine. When she answered, he demanded to know where I was and why I wasn't responding to his messages. Luna put him on speaker so I could hear. He sounded desperate, saying he'd made a terrible mistake and needed to talk to me face to face. Then his tone changed completely when Luna told him we were at the cabin. He became enraged, saying I had no right to change the locks on his cabin, and that he'd call the police if I didn't give him the new keys immediately. Luna reminded him that the cabin had been in my family for 3 generations, and his name wasn't on any of the paperwork. He hung up on her. 20 minutes later, we saw his car pulling up the driveway. Luna and I quickly locked the doors and closed the blinds. Peter started pounding on the door, yelling that he knew we were inside and demanding to be let in. When we didn't respond, he tried using his key, then started circling the cabin looking for another way in. I called the local sheriff, who arrived about 15 minutes later. By then, Peter was sitting in his car in the driveway, refusing to leave. The sheriff spoke to him first, then came to the door to speak with me. I showed him the deed to the cabin. I'd brought it with me, thankfully, proving it was my family property, not marital property. I also explained the situation with the ongoing divorce and financial restraining order. The sheriff advised me to file for a protective order when I got back to town, saying Peter seemed unusually fixated on getting into the cabin. We stayed at the cabin that night anyway, with the sheriff promising to have a deputy drive by periodically to check on us. In the morning, we found Peter's car parked down the road just out of sight of the cabin. He was asleep inside. We called the sheriff again, who came and escorted Peter away with a warning that he'd be arrested for trespassing if he returned. When we got back to town, I went straight to the courthouse to file for a protective order. While I was filling out the paperwork, I received an email from Peter's work email, the only way he could contact me since I'd blocked him everywhere else. The subject line was, "What I found," and the email contained only a photo of a storage unit key and the words, "I know everything." At first, I had no idea what he was talking about. I don't have a storage unit. Then it hit me. My dad had a storage unit where he kept some family heirlooms and paperwork after he downsized to a smaller house last year. I'd helped him organize it and had a spare key. Peter had only been there once, but he must have found the key and made the connection. I immediately called my dad, but he didn't answer. I tried my stepmom, and she told me they were actually at the storage facility right then because they'd gotten an alert that someone had accessed their unit. I told her about Peter's email and asked if anything was missing. She said they'd just arrived and were waiting for the facility manager to help them get in because the lock had been changed. I left the courthouse and drove straight to the storage facility. By the time I arrived, the police were already there. The facility's security cameras had captured Peter entering with my spare key, then leaving with several boxes. The facility manager said it had happened the day before, just hours after Peter had left the cabin. My dad was furious. Among the items missing were family photo albums, some of my late mother's jewelry that he'd been saving for me, and a file box containing family documents. including the original deed to the cabin and some of my parents' financial information. The police took a report. But since Peter was technically my husband, and I'd given him access to the key, albeit unknowingly, they said it might be hard to pursue theft charges. That night, Peter sent another email. "We need to talk about what happens next. Meet me tomorrow or I start selling things." He included a photo of my mother's engagement ring, the one I'd always hoped to have someday. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and the police officer handling the case. Lisa advised me not to meet with Peter alone under any circumstances, but said we could arrange a meeting at her office with security present. The officer said they'd try to get a warrant to search Peter's brother's house for the stolen items, but it might take a few days. I'm writing this update from a hotel room that Peter doesn't know about. I've moved all my essential belongings here and told only Luna and my parents where I am. The protective order hearing is tomorrow, and Lisa thinks we have a strong case given Peter's escalating behavior. I still can't believe how quickly my life imploded. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was in a stable marriage with a man who loved me. Now I'm hiding in a hotel room while my husband ransacks my family's possessions and tries to extort me with my dead mother's jewelry. I'll update again after the hearing. Thank you all for your support and advice. Second update. The protective order hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning. I arrived at the courthouse with my lawyer Lisa an hour early. We were reviewing our documentation when my dad texted that Peter was in the parking lot, pacing back and forth beside his car. Lisa immediately notified court security, who said they'd keep an eye on him but couldn't do anything until he actually entered the building. About 15 minutes before the hearing, Peter walked in with his own lawyer, some slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. They sat on the opposite side of the waiting area, and Peter kept staring at me with this weird mix of anger and what he probably thought was remorse. His lawyer tried to approach us about working something out before we go in, but Lisa shut that down immediately. When we were called into the courtroom, I had to describe everything that had happened: the financial theft, the break-ins at our house and the cabin, the storage unit theft, and the threatening emails. The judge asked several questions about the timeline and wanted to know if Peter had ever been physically violent. I explained that while he hadn't hit me, his behavior had become increasingly erratic and intimidating. Peter's lawyer tried to paint him as a devoted husband who'd made one mistake and was now being denied access to his own home and possessions. He claimed Peter only went to the cabin because he was concerned about its maintenance, and that he'd taken items from the storage unit because they were marital property he was afraid I would hide or destroy. Then Peter spoke. He looked directly at me and said he was deeply sorry for his lapse in judgment with Kayla, but insisted that I was blowing everything out of proportion. He claimed he'd already broken things off with her and returned most of the money to our accounts. The whole time he was talking, I kept thinking about those texts where he called me a stupid pig. When it was my turn to respond, I pulled out my phone and showed the judge the screenshots of Peter's messages to Kayla about me. I also presented bank statements showing that no money had been returned, contrary to what he'd just claimed under oath. After hearing both sides, the judge granted the temporary protective order for 90 days. Peter is not allowed to contact me except through our lawyers and must stay at least 100 yards away from me, my workplace, Luna's house, and my parents' home. The judge also ordered Peter to return all stolen items within 48 hours. That night, I received a DM. It was Kayla. She said Peter had been harassing her since she broke things off, showing up at her apartment and workplace, demanding she tell me they were no longer together. She asked if we could meet because there were things I should know. Kayla looked nothing like I expected. From her photos, I'd imagined this confident, glamorous homewrecker. In person, she seemed young, nervous, and completely out of her depth. She started by apologizing, claiming again that Peter had told her we were separated. I asked why she continued the relationship after finding out that wasn't true. She admitted that by then, Peter had convinced her they were meant to be together, and that I was the only thing standing in their way. Peter hadn't just been stealing from our joint accounts, he'd also taken out loans in both our names, using fake emails so I wouldn't see the approval notifications. Kayla showed me texts Peter had forwarded to her, discussing loan terms and payment schedules. Based on what she showed me, there's at least another $40K in debt I knew nothing about. Kayla also revealed that our plan to buy a house wasn't just talk. Peter had actually put down a deposit on a condo using our savings, telling the real estate agent that his wife, me, would be signing the paperwork later. The condo was supposed to be a surprise for Kayla's birthday next month. When I asked why she was telling me all this now, she said Peter had become increasingly controlling and sometimes scary. After I confronted him and cut off access to the money, he'd started pressuring her to take out loans in her name. When she refused, he became angry and threatened to tell her conservative parents about their relationship. Apparently, they still think she's saving herself for marriage. I wasn't sure whether to believe her, but Luna pointed out that regardless of Kayla's motives, the information about the loans was something I needed to investigate. I thanked Kayla for coming forward and told her I'd have my lawyer contact her if we needed a formal statement. As we were leaving, she handed me a small box containing a pair of earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Apparently, Peter had given them to her, claiming they were family heirlooms from his side. The next day, I met with Lisa again and showed her everything Kayla had given me. She immediately began investigating the loans and discovered that Peter had indeed taken out 3 personal loans totaling $42K using our joint information. She filed emergency motions to add this new information to our divorce proceedings and financial restraining order. Meanwhile, my dad called to tell me that some of the items from the storage unit had been returned. They'd been left in a box on his front porch with no note. My mother's engagement ring wasn't among the returned items, nor were several other valuable pieces. 2 days after the protective order was granted, I finally returned to our house with a police escort to collect more of my belongings. The house was in even worse shape than before. It looked like Peter had been living there despite the locks being changed. There were empty food containers everywhere, clothes strewn about, and a lingering smell of alcohol. My escort explained that they couldn't prevent Peter from entering since his name was on the deed, despite the protective order barring him from contacting me. As I was packing more clothes and personal items, I noticed something odd about the bedroom wall. The frame holding our wedding photo was hanging crooked, and the wall behind it looked different. I removed the frame and found a small hole that had been patched over recently. I remembered that Peter had installed a wall safe in that spot when we first bought the house. We'd used it for passports and emergency cash. The safe was gone, the entire thing removed from the wall and patched over. I mentioned this to the officer, who documented it as possible evidence of financial misconduct, but explained that since Peter was a legal owner of the house, removing a fixture wasn't technically a crime. Still, it was unsettling to realize he'd been systematically removing things from our home while I was staying elsewhere. That evening, Peter's brother Tobias called me. He apologized for the late call, but said he needed to tell me something important. According to Tobias, Peter had shown up at his house completely drunk the night before, ranting about how I'd ruined everything, and how he was going to make sure I got nothing in the divorce. Tobias said he became concerned when Peter started talking about insurance policies and leverage he had over me. Tobias admitted that he'd initially let Peter stay with him because he believed Peter's version of events, that I'd overreacted to a brief fling and thrown him out unfairly. But after seeing Peter's erratic behavior and hearing him talk about the money he'd taken, Tobias said he no longer felt comfortable having Peter in his home. He'd asked Peter to leave that morning, which had resulted in a huge argument. Before hanging up, Tobias mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. Apparently, Peter had been meeting with some business associates Tobias didn't recognize, people who didn't seem like Peter's usual crowd. When Tobias asked about them, Peter had been evasive, saying only that they were helping him protect his assets from me. On Friday, my lawyer called with news. The court had expedited our financial discovery process due to the evidence of fraud, and Peter's accounts had been frozen pending investigation. His lawyer had suddenly requested a meeting to discuss settlement terms, a complete reversal from their previous stance of fighting everything. Lisa suspected they'd realized how bad things looked for Peter, especially with the new evidence of loan fraud and his attempt to access my retirement funds. She advised me to agree to the meeting, but warned me not to get my hopes up about recovering all the money. At this point, she explained, much of it was probably gone, spent on Kayla, the condo deposit, which we were still tracking down, and whatever other expenses Peter had been hiding. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at Lisa's office. Over the weekend, I tried to prepare myself mentally for seeing Peter again. Luna stayed with me at the hotel and helped me organize all my documentation. We were up late Sunday night when my phone buzzed with a text from Janice. She'd received a concerning call from Rosalind, who said Peter had shown up at her house in an agitated state, talking about leaving town. Janice wanted me to know, in case it affected the Monday meeting. I forwarded this information to Lisa, who said she'd notify the court in the morning. I tried to sleep, but kept having nightmares about Peter showing up at the hotel. I checked and rechecked that the room was secure, even pushing a chair against the door. Monday morning arrived and Luna drove me to Lisa's office. We were early again, so we sat in the parking lot drinking coffee and trying to calm my nerves. At exactly 9 a.m., Lisa called my cell. She was already inside, and Peter's lawyer had arrived, but there was no sign of Peter himself. We decided to go in anyway. Peter's lawyer, Mr. Zane, looked uncomfortable as he explained that he hadn't been able to reach his client since the previous evening. He'd assumed Peter would meet him at the office. Lisa suggested we proceed with preliminary discussions while waiting, but I could tell everyone was on edge. About 30 minutes into the meeting, Lisa's assistant interrupted to say that someone from the police department was calling for me. The officer on the phone explained that they'd received a call from the management office at my apartment complex. The maintenance staff had entered my unit for a reported water leak and found extensive damage, furniture slashed, walls damaged, and what appeared to be oil or paint poured over everything. The officer asked if I could come identify what had been damaged and what might be missing. The apartment was worse than I'd imagined. Every piece of furniture had been cut or broken, photos had been smashed, and black oil had been poured over the bed, couch, and carpets. The television had been smashed and someone had written "stupid pig" on the living room wall, the same words Peter had used to describe me in his texts. As the police took photos and documented the damage, I sat in Lisa's car trying not to fall apart. She was on the phone with the judge's clerk, explaining the situation and requesting an emergency hearing to address the violation of the protective order. The police officer who'd been inside came over and asked if I had somewhere safe to stay, as the apartment would be uninhabitable for some time. I nodded, though I wasn't sure the hotel felt safe anymore. I'm writing this update from yet another hotel, this one with better security and under a different name. The police still haven't located Peter, and I'm terrified about what he might do next. Lisa is pushing for an expedited divorce hearing based on the extreme circumstances, but the legal process is still moving slower than I'd like. The most frustrating part is knowing that even when this is all over, I may never recover the money he stole or the family heirlooms he took. The life I thought I had, the future I was saving for, has been dismantled by the person I trusted most. And for what? For a younger woman who dumped him as soon as the money stopped flowing? For a few months of living beyond his means? I'll update again when there are new developments. For now, I'm just trying to stay safe and figure out how to rebuild from the ashes of the life Peter burned down. Last update. It's been almost 2 months since my last update. I've started writing this post at least a dozen times, but something new would always happen that changed the situation. I think I can finally share the complete story now. After the apartment destruction and Peter's disappearance, there was a statewide alert put out for him. The police were taking the protective order violation seriously. For almost a week, there was no sign of him. I stayed in my secure hotel, barely sleeping, jumping at every noise. Then on Friday evening, I received a call from Detective Robson, who'd been assigned to my case. They'd located Peter's car abandoned in the parking lot of a shopping center about 40 miles outside of town. His wallet and phone were inside, but there was no sign of him. They were treating it as a missing person case and asked if I had any ideas where he might have gone. I honestly didn't. The Peter I thought I knew wouldn't abandon his car or disappear without a word. But then again, the Peter I thought I knew wouldn't steal our life savings for his girlfriend or destroy our apartment. The detective asked me to let them know if I heard anything, emphasizing that I should not attempt to contact Peter if he reached out to me. 2 days later, Rosalind called in hysterics. Peter had shown up at her house in the middle of the night, looking disheveled and acting strange. He'd asked to use her shower and borrow some money, claiming he was handling a situation and would pay her back double. When she questioned him about the police looking for him, he'd gotten angry and left. She'd waited until morning to call me because she was scared of how he'd reacted. I immediately called Detective Robson and gave him Rosalind's information. Within hours, they'd set up surveillance at her house in case Peter returned. Meanwhile, Lisa filed an emergency motion to freeze any remaining assets and accounts we hadn't already secured, including a previously unknown investment account Tobias had discovered Peter had opened last year. 3 more days passed with no sign of Peter. Then on Wednesday morning, I received a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the park by the lake, 2 p.m. Come alone or I disappear for good." I forwarded it to Detective, who confirmed it was sent from a burner phone but likely from Peter based on the writing style. They advised me not to go but said they could set up an operation to monitor the meeting from a distance if I wanted to try to draw him out. After talking it through with Lisa, I agreed. The park was public enough to be relatively safe, and I wanted this nightmare to end. At 1:45, I arrived at the park with an unmarked police car following at a distance. I sat on a bench facing the lake as instructed and waited. I heard someone approach from behind. It was Peter. He sat down without looking at me and started talking immediately. He said everyone had turned against him, that his whole life had been destroyed because of one mistake. I just listened as he rambled, trying not to show how disgusted and angry I felt. He eventually got to the point. He needed money to start over somewhere else. He claimed if I transferred $20K to an account he'd set up, he would sign the divorce papers immediately and I'd never hear from him again. I asked about the apartment, the storage unit theft, my mother's jewelry. He acted like these were minor inconveniences compared to what he was going through. Before I could respond, he grabbed my arm and said I needed to come with him to fix this mess. I pulled away and stood up, telling him clearly that I wasn't going anywhere with him. He looked genuinely shocked, as if it hadn't occurred to him that I would refuse. In that moment, 2 plainclothes officers approached and identified themselves. Peter looked at me with pure hatred before turning and running toward the parking lot. He didn't get far. They caught him within seconds and placed him in handcuffs while reading him his rights. That night, Detective called to inform me that Peter was in custody for violating the protective order and would be held pending a bail hearing. They'd searched his backpack and found several disturbing items. A list of addresses, including my hotel. I still don't know how he found it. Printouts of my bank statements, and a small box containing my mother's engagement ring. The bail hearing was set for Friday morning. I attended with Lisa, sitting as far from the proceedings as possible. The prosecutor presented evidence of the protective order violation, the apartment destruction, and the threatening behavior. Peter's court-appointed attorney argued for release, claiming Peter was going through an emotional crisis due to the divorce and just wanted to resolve things with his wife. The judge denied bail, citing the risk Peter posed based on his recent actions. He would remain in custody until trial, which could be months away. The judge's ruling came quickly and decisively. He granted the divorce on grounds of fraud and adultery, awarded me the house and cabin outright, and ordered Peter to repay all the stolen money plus my legal fees. He also addressed the criminal charges Peter was facing for the protective order violation, apartment destruction, and financial fraud, noting that these would be handled in separate proceedings. As we left the courtroom, Lisa warned me that while the judgment was in my favor, actually recovering the money would be challenging. Peter had spent most of it already, and his financial situation was dire with his job loss and mounting legal troubles. She suggested we file liens against any future earnings or assets, but prepared me for the possibility that I might never see the full amount. A week after the hearing, I received a call from Ralph, Peter's father. He asked to meet with me privately. When I arrived, he got straight to the point. He felt partially responsible for not recognizing Peter's dishonesty sooner and wanted to make amends. He handed me an envelope containing a cashier's check for $25,000, not the full amount Peter had stolen, but enough to help me get back on my feet. After careful consideration, I accepted the check with the agreement that I would use part of it to repair the family cabin that Peter had damaged. It felt like the right compromise, acknowledging Ralph's gesture while maintaining boundaries. The criminal proceedings against Peter moved forward. He ultimately accepted a plea deal for the protective order violation, destruction of property, and financial fraud charges. The terms included 18 months in county jail, mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment, and 5 years of probation after release. The plea agreement also incorporated the financial restitution ordered in our divorce decree. As for Kayla, I've had no contact with her since the court hearing. It's been 6 months since this nightmare began. I've sold the house, too many bad memories, and moved to a new apartment across town. I've been slowly replacing the possessions Peter destroyed and rebuilding my savings. The money is still gone. I'll likely never recover most of it. For those who have followed my story from the beginning, thank you for your support and advice.